All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today and welcome to our seminar where our focus is going to be supporting children and families after the shooting at Central Visual and Performing Arts last week in St. Louis. My name is Amy Escott. I use she, her pronouns. I am a licensed professional counselor here at our Child Advocacy Center, and I direct our Missouri Academy of Child Trauma Studies. I'm going to let my colleagues who are presenting today introduce themselves. Andrea?
Good morning. I'm Andrea Cox and I work for, I almost said Children's Advocacy Services. Jerry, are you smiling out there? I used to work for Children's Advocacy Services. I'm currently an assistant professor of counselor education at Missouri Baptist University. And I'm glad to be here today. Good morning, everyone.
Megan?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Megan Marietta. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I am the director of programming for the Children's Advocacy Services. But up until June of this year, I had served as the manager of social work services for St. Louis Public Schools and was in that role for 12 years. So this tragedy that has occurred in our community impacts me on a pretty profoundly deep level. And although it is such an unfathomable tragedy that has occurred in our community, it is so encouraging and uplifting to see so many people coming together from across the region to support one another in the healing. And we'll talk a little bit about what's been going on this week as well. So thank you all for being here.
All right, and we have our fearless executive director with us today, Dr. Jerry Dunn. Jerry?
Good morning, everyone. I just want to say, to echo the thoughts that have been said so far, just again, this is a really difficult time for us, but I'm really encouraged that so many people have reached out for support and are open to that support. And so I'm grateful for every single one of you who are here today. And I'm extraordinarily grateful of our team here and our ability to provide what we hope is some good information and some practical information for you as you manage supporting the children and families over the next few days, weeks, and probably even months after this. So thank you to Amy and to Megan and to Andrea, even though she's still one of us, even though she's not with us every day. So thanks very much for this today.
Fantastic. All right, Megan's going to get us started of sort of just orienting us to sort of how we came to be here today. And then we will jump in and take it from there. We do ask that we have time allowed for questions. So please feel free to use the chat as questions sort of pop up. We're likely going to wait to take those questions until the end, just so that we can kind of consolidate and organize questions as they emerge. Megan.
Yeah, so immediately following last week's shooting, crisis response immediately happened. And the overwhelming need from our community and SLPS in particular really led folks to say, we need more hands on deck. And with the Department of Mental Health really serving as a convener for community agencies across the region, what we've been able to do is to push into schools within the district to provide in-person as well as virtual crisis response to staff and to students. And what we're seeing in the schools, and I can speak as a historical, from a historical perspective, as I did lead the district's crisis intervention team in my time with the district. And what we're seeing is that staff and students are wanting to talk. They are seeking out the helpers in their buildings. They are engaging in conversation about their reactions, their feelings, not only to the shooting at CVPA, but about stressors in general. What were they already feeling prior to last Monday? How are they coping? What do they need? And so this morning, some of the goals that we've set out is to help develop an understanding of what you might see in children and teens. How are they responding? What might be some of the behaviors that you're seeing? What might be some of the emotional reactions that you're seeing as well? We're also going to highlight what are some of the signs in terms of emotions or behaviors, behavioral changes that you should really be in tune to, because if you see them, they might be little red flags for you that something's going on. And I can tell you that from our staff's reports, pushing into the schools, we are seeing that, again, children are talking about depression. Children are talking about anxiety. Children are talking about fear for their safety, and staff are talking about the same. So you might hear similar concerns, but then how will that look? How do children and adults express that? But then we're going to talk about what can we do to help? There are resources in the community, but also how do you yourself become a resource? How can you support? What are some of the words? What are some of the actions that you can take in order to support individuals that you care about? So really, am I going to do this one? I'm not sure. I'm looking at Amy.
You can.
All right, perfect. So understanding that everyone does respond differently to stress. We also know that everyone grieves differently as well. So really understanding that the events that really have been happening, and I really want to be inclusive of the pandemic, that we are still in some senses living in a pandemic, and most definitely responding to still the effects, the outcomes of the pandemic as well. But really understanding that what is traumatic for one person might not be traumatic for another person. I know that yesterday I was at Roosevelt High School and talking with a 10th grader who she came in to talk because she was angry that her classmate wasn't responding the same way that she was. So really talking with her though about how we each do respond differently, and how also different experiences in our life can also shape how we respond. Again, it's based on not only what happened, but how we perceive that event. What was the meaning to us? And so also understanding that we each have a different level of intimacy with the event. Some of you may have been there. Some of you have children that were there. Some of you have loved ones that were in the building as well. And so understanding that that is a concern. If you have children that go to school in general, did that change how safe you felt about putting them out the door the next morning? So understanding that we all do perceive it differently. Our individual experiences also impact that. And really understanding that though, although we might respond and it may be a traumatizing experience, it's important to remember that most folks really can experience the symptoms, but then return to previous levels of functioning, that we can restore, we can work through and restore to where we were previous before the event.
Thank you. And as Megan referenced, there are all sorts of different ways and factors that research shows us that are going to help give clues or insights into when is it that people have a little bit more difficulty bouncing back, or where we might need to have a few extra eyes and care to attend to children and really to attend to ourselves. And so with that, some of the factors that we know are sort of, for many of our children, this is yet another horrific event on top of horrific events that they have endured day in and day out through much of their childhood. So to what degree have they had previous trauma experience? As Megan referenced earlier, I like that word, there's variations in how intimately connected people are to this tragedy, and what is the meaning that they make from this, right? So what are sort of the messages that the children's brains are kind of leaping to, right? So you could envision one child who sort of comes up with a framework of this was sort of a really unusual bad luck situation. This is horrific. I'm really sad. But they kind of put the framework on like a one-time thing versus a child where the meaning and significance they take from this is I'm not safe anywhere ever. And you could envision how those different thoughts are going to influence both symptomology as well as resilience. We're going to come to this next bullet point more on our next slide, but a big piece here as well is adult distress. And so we'll come back to that in a moment. But we as grownups have the honor and the burden of really being the guideposts and the leaders of how children respond to horrifically stressful situations. And so more on that to come. In addition, we know that our kiddos that were struggling with anxiety and depression before this shooting are probably going to continue to struggle and might be at more risk. So those would be kids and teens that we want to kind of keep eyes on. We're going to come back to this piece about community resources later in our discussion today. But in general, the children and teens that already had existing connections, the community resources and mentors and have people checking in on them will generally like help them bounce back a little bit easier. An additional group of people we want to sort of have a little closer eye on are children that might have different language skills, that might experience the same level of internal fear, anxiety, and depression, but either be too little to be able to get it out there to other people, or may not have verbal skills to be communicative in those ways. So as I referenced earlier, children do look to grown-ups, right? And as you'll see on our next slide, one of the biggest factors, which I find so helpful in promoting healing and resilience in children, is the care of a supportive grown-up. Now, this does not have to be like a biological parent, a grandparent, an aunt, or an uncle. This could really be any caring grown-up in our community. And we feel very strongly that these children are the responsibility of all of St. Louis. This is not like a St. Louis City thing or a St. Louis County thing. These are all of our babies, and it is our legal, or it's my legal, but for everybody else, it's our ethical and moral responsibility to do right by children. And that is both a profound honor and a profound burden, particularly when we as adults are also human and are having our own anxieties and our own fears. As Megan mentioned, many people on this call have connections to the shooting, have children in schools. And so it's a really tricky spot to be in of how do we manage our own reaction while also doing right by children. And our hope today is that we can help offer you some guideposts around how to give yourself space and to metabolize your own feelings in order to help children as much as you can. So to that end, why is it that grown-ups play this critical role? So children are going to be looking at you for one, information, right? There's a lot of variability across the St. Louis City Public School District of what information was communicated to children, how much information. Megan was sharing with me that some schools are referencing like the event that happened last Monday. So we do just want to throw out there the importance of accurate information. We encourage people to label the event and talking to children as the Central Visual and Performing Arts School shooting, and using that term just because it helps with clarity for children. Children also are going to be looking to you all as caring adults for guidance. How do I think? How do I feel? Where do I need to be worried about my safety? And then we don't want to overlook the importance of comfort, of cuddles and hugs and saying, I have your back, and continuing with family rituals, continuing with patterns and routines. All of those are going to be ways for you to help be supportive for children. So with all of that in mind, where we are right now in a trauma response standpoint is we are in what we call the sort of immediate stress response. So we today are going to be talking about these reactions that happen immediately following a crisis. Typically, we think about sort of like the first 30 days. And the first 30 days after the crisis, or in this case, the shooting, how we approach children is going to be a little bit different than how we respond after, after that sort of first month. And for this reason, the reason is that having reactions like we're going to talk through today, there are so many reactions that are normal. They represent healthy grieving processes, and they represent the children's capacity to try to understand something that is, there's no explanation for, right? Like, so just like us, children's brains are trying to wrap their head around, how is it that someone could come into a school, which is a place that should be safe, a place for learning, a place for growth, and that there was a shooting and people died. And so there's a lot of symptoms and reactions that pop up that become, right, that become part of the normal expression of how they process this. These reactions that we're going to think about now, they typically resolve after a month. Most children, this will resolve naturally. Sorry, so most children who don't have pre-existing post-traumatic stress prior to this event, things will resolve naturally based on the structure and the support of their environment. So what do we mean by reactions that are normal? So it could be lots of different things. And my guess is many of you in your role as caring adults have seen some of these reactions from the humans that you interact with in the past week. It could be sadness. It could be sort of nervousness and jumpiness. I've heard a lot about sleep problems and nightmares, people forgetting to eat, maybe people eating too much or drinking too much, a lot of tummy aches, headaches, sort of that. The word on here is somatic, but that sort of just like physical complaints is often an expression of anxiety for children. We also see some regressive behaviors, so especially for those of you who have children in your world who are early childhood, this could look like pottying accidents. So a kid who was previously potty trained is now having more accidents. Or a child might, somebody was talking about this the other day, of sort of like a lovey or a teddy bear that the child used to carry with them all the time. And maybe now they're sort of attaching to some of those comfort objects that they didn't previously need. In addition, one that is more unpleasant for grown-ups to deal with is many children and many grown-ups, right, respond to this type of stress with increased irritability. So being on edge, being snappier, being crankier, things like, can you take the garbage out? That like is usually not a big deal. You might see sort of like disproportionate reactions as well to that. Some very specific ones that come, so these next few come from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. So when we are looking specifically at children's reactions following school shootings, some specific areas to keep an eye out for are really strong reactions to reminders of the shooting. I think that's kind of obvious, but perhaps it's hearing sirens, perhaps it is seeing officers. One that a colleague at our national center pointed out as well is just physically seeing other children, right? Because at the collegiate, I know, Megan, is it right that everyone in that building is still virtual?
Yes, that's my
Both
understanding.
parts of the building, right? So you can envision when people see each other over Zoom, for virtual classes, or when they see each other again for the first time, whenever they are back together in a building, that reactions to other people in the classroom could be particularly challenging. And in addition, I think it's very sad, but not surprising. You might also see a heightened sensitivity to sound. Is a very common response in this situation. Another thing that can pop up is sort of really staying fixed on the day of the shooting themselves. And sometimes I like to talk this through of when children start looping. And what I mean by looping is it could be sort of asking the same question, or I was chatting with a child who's like a first grader, and they were like, hey, did you hear this happened at this school? And this person did this and blah, 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 blah. And then we moved on. And then a few minutes later, wait, did I tell you that at this school today that this person came in and shot people and people died? And so it's sort of like they keep kind of repeating themselves. And sometimes that could be a verbal repetition, but sometimes it could be play-based as well. Another thing that's super normal is concentration, right? If children and teens are worried about, people that they have lost or what might come next, and it's going to make it harder to pay attention in math class or in other things. In addition, for some people, they tend to become more withdrawn or isolated, or to sort of have diminished interest in activities. Another youth I was talking to this week was like, I just don't feel like going to this sports practice. Like, I know I need to go. I know it's going to be good for me, but like, it's just going to make, like, I just want to be at home. For this young person, like home was sort of their place. Like, I just want to be home. I don't want to go other places. So with that in mind, again, we encourage you to just remember that all of these are natural things and we want to support kids, but it's not necessarily like, again, these are actually viewed as unpleasant things for kids to deal with, but it's also a very healthy risk. So a few things just to remember, again, we referenced this earlier, that we as grown-ups are navigating and metabolizing our own reactions to this event and needing to create space to do that in order to show up for children. And so to that end, we cannot recommend reaching out for your own mental health support or talking to a colleague or talking to a friend, whatever you need to do to be able to enter that space and hold the child's feelings, thoughts, and reactions is what we would encourage you to do. We realize this is like easier said than done. So sometimes this may end up being something of like, if it's a child in your own home, of saying something like, honey, I am having really big feelings about this. Like, I need a little bit of time for me to sort of walk through that myself. And can I connect with you about this in a little bit, right? And sort of stepping aside and building yourself time and space. Sometimes I feel like, it's a very natural instinct to be like, I'm always available to have really big conversations with kids all the time. But in your everyday life, you might need to take a hot minute prior to moving into these conversations. So some recommendations that we would have are that we want to give only as much information as what the child needs to help feel safer and more secure. And so oftentimes what this looks like is sort of a conversation where information is added gradually. So for example, you may have a child who says something of why would somebody do this? Why would somebody shoot a school? Okay. And I feel like for many people, your initial response might be like panic of like, well, I have no idea, right? And so you could just respond to that and say, we really aren't quite sure exactly, what makes somebody do this. Their brain, was perhaps not working in quite the right way. And that could be enough, right? And then you could have another child or a kid who comes later who might be like, well, what do you mean like their brain wasn't working quite the right way? And then we might get into a conversation about mental illness and other factors and other support, right? But it's layering the information as the child asks. I actually like to say this is very similar to when children ask questions about like, where do babies come from? Right. So when children say like, where do babies come from? You could say from their mom. And like, that might be okay. And then a couple days later, it might be the question of, well, how does the baby get into the mom? And so it's sort of just being specific of not over explaining and following the child's lead. Especially for our itty bitties, we do want you to be prepared that the conversation there might be a lot of repeating of the information. And so going ahead and kind of expecting that we're going to have the conversation, and then to the degree that you can, checking in. So to say like, yesterday we talked about this, what questions do you have? And really trying to keep open that line of communication. And then I know Andrea will, I think, talk about this in her section as well, but we really want to limit the news broadcasts and the news coverage and to be thoughtful. Children are fantastic eavesdroppers, but like if you need to just have all the feelings and have a grown-up conversation, for some families that means like the parent goes and sits in their car to have that conversation so that little ears aren't hearing about big things. But just being very thoughtful of that for a variety of reasons, right? And some of you may be in this situation, but children of first responders can watch footage of their first responder parents sprinting into the building to help, not knowing, I mean, I know they know after the event, right? But they could have watched live that situation happen, which is, you know, absolutely terrifying. And so we know that too much news coverage can actually lead to some worse outcomes. So then last, oh, sorry, we had this slide in here twice. We can go on. Thank you, Tenley. All right. So with this again, just to sort of synthesize, we also get the question of like, well, let's just not talk about it. You know, my child doesn't go to the district. My child didn't go to that school. My grandchild doesn't know what's going on. They are too little. Well, guess what? If they are around other kids, they have probably heard about this. Or as referenced with the eavesdropping, they have probably heard about the shooting anyway. And so we need to give them the opportunity to have accurate information, to clarify any misinformation. So one child I was talking to, the question was about, could the shooter, like the child had understood that the police had the shooter, and the kid wanted to know, could the shooter get out of jail, right? Could the shooter get out of jail and then this, and this happened? So there was misinformation there that needed to be clarified. And it needed to be clarified at the point that the kid was saying, I'm worried that this person could get out of jail and come do this in my school. Because if he did it at someone else's school, he could do it in my school. And so again, this is just opportunities where even if it's uncomfortable for us, kids are thinking about this, they've heard about it, and having the courage on our part to have these conversations, even if we are scared and we are uncomfortable, is a huge gift in their healing process.
And I would just one more note, in addition to hearing about things, it's important to remember that the entire district went on a hard lockdown. So although the children, and all children, not just in SLPS, all children practice intruder drills, SLPS was on a hard lockdown. So having conversations with children of all ages about even just what was that experience like, and so being mindful of that, and remembering that children are practicing these drills, so it's already being taught to them. So how do you want to have a conversation with them? This is something that they're being exposed to, whether you are having direct conversation or not. So how do you want to influence their perception of what's going on?
Thank you. And on the next slide, we have just a few more reminders. As much as we all want to say, no, honey, this will never happen at your building, this will never happen again, these are false promises and will ultimately potentially hurt your relationship with that child. And so we want to avoid these promises that we sincerely want to give. Now, if you were saying to a kid, we are going to go live off grid and you will be homeschooled and we will never interact with society again, then you might be able to make that promise. But for most of us, it's not a promise that we can make. So instead of making promises, we encourage you to offer reassurances, to reassure children, to say, we really hope that this will never happen again. And I think it's important to think about, and again, it's tricky, so Megan and Andrea, feel free to hop in here, but it is the responsibility of the grown-ups to prevent school shooting, right? Like that is not children's responsibilities. Where I think this is different than other types of disasters or other types of traumatic events is that it is the children's responsibility to do what the grown-ups tell them when they are doing intruder drills, or heaven forbid, if the crisis is happening. So I think for myself, I think it's finding that balance of, this is the responsibility of the caring adults in our society to figure out how to not have children have to worry that someone might shoot them at school. It's a child's responsibility until we get there to do what the grown-ups say in those moments of crisis, right?
Yeah, so I'll jump in and kind of add my personal experience, if you'll let me. So my children are 10 and 8, and the week before the shooting at Central, my kids had an intruder drill at their school. They've had them for years. But that week they were telling me about their intruder drill, and I just flat out said, I hate that you have to have these drills. I just hate it. We never had intruder drills when I was a kid, right? To see the shift and how we are preparing our children. And my son who's 10, said, oh, if we can, yeah, my son who's 10 said, but you would want us to be prepared, right? And it stopped me in my tracks because yes, I would want you to be prepared. And my daughter who's 8 very proudly told me, and I was the one who got to lock the door in our classroom today during the drill. That was like an honor or a privilege. So they are very much so being taught about how to keep one another safe. So after the shooting, I went back to the children and we had another conversation about their drill. And then my tone was very much, you do what the adults tell you to do to keep one another safe. You do these things to keep yourself safe, right? And so it is scary having those conversations with our kids. It's unsettling to have them, but my son is right. I do want them to know what to do. So yeah, this one really hits home as a parent, you know, just being able to offer them that reassurance and just giving them all the tools that we can to help them respond.
Yeah, I'll jump in here too, because and I worked as a preschool teacher at a school in Las Vegas when there was an active shooter in our building. And it was way before active shooter drills, right? And so adults in the building our building was had a glass entryway, and adults in the building were walking in front of the building, from the door, kind of looking out. And I'm like, it's probably not a good idea to walk around in front of a glass door when people might be shooting. Let's all go to our rooms. And without really knowing, I just advised people to do the thing that felt logical, right? And so it's nice to know that that responsibility doesn't have to fall on any one individual in the building, but that folks have come together and really thought about what are all the things that need to happen to keep kids safe to the best of our abilities, and then figured out how to roll that out within schools. So even though it does feel unsettling, I'm like you, Megan, my 12-year-old has talked about having to run out of his building to the cemetery and hide behind tombstones. I mean, it's the things that we're thinking about and that our kids have to think about do feel unsettling, but there is some solace, I feel like, in knowing that our kids know what they're supposed to do and they're not going to just be flailing. And then also that adults know what to do, and having opportunities to practice those things when they're calm, then will hopefully allow cooler heads to prevail in those moments when the grown-up is saying, we need to do X, Y, and Z. Kids kind of already know what to expect. So I think there is a lot of positivity that comes from just having those opportunities, even though it does feel unsettling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have a great question in the chat right now. What are some of the suggestions on how to respond to a student who says, you know, hey, I heard that there's going to be a shooting at our school tomorrow? How's a good way to respond without having to just simply say that's not true? So are there any suggestions? Yeah.
Well, I was wondering, do we want to address this now or come back to it in our question and answer time? I don't know, Megan, if you have a quick answer.
If we
I
could
think
address it now, it would be appreciated.
Okay. I think like the big thing here is really connecting, and other people can weigh in, but connecting with like the fear. And Stacey, I don't know if this is sort of, I'm envisioning this as sort of like the anxious child reporting this as a school social worker. And, you know, first connecting to, you are like, yes, this makes sense that you would be worried about this. This makes sense that it's something that would be scary. And then sort of thinking about ways of bringing in more factual information, if there is more factual information. And again, Megan, you have more experience with this than I do, but I think my first question would be like, how would I know for sure that like this wasn't true? And I wouldn't want to I wouldn't want to assume that this isn't true if this is like actually a legit drug. Megan, what would you add?
Yeah, so I would definitely say, as caring adults, if a child brings any sort of rumor to you or information that they might have or concerns about a school shooting, I would definitely advise you to make sure that you are reporting that. Maybe it is a rumor, but maybe it needs to be looked into a little bit deeper. So, depending on some of the circumstances, I would say that you would want to connect with the school and let them know that this is what's being said. Are they aware of it? Have they looked into it? Yes, are there safety measures being put into place? And really that reassurance of these are the things that we know that your school does to take precaution to ensure safety. These are the things that you know how to do to ensure your safety as well. But I would definitely say as well to make sure that school is aware of any of those rumors or concerns. If there's anything on social media, making sure that folks are aware of that and the appropriate folks.
So I'll jump in and add, similar to Megan, although my son didn't have an intruder drill the week before, the Wednesday before the shooting at CVPA, a child in my son's 7th grade classroom threatened to bring a gun. And so my child was feeling very dysregulated about going back to school. He knew on Thursday and Friday that the child would not be there. We talked about the procedures that the school would use, such as explaining to him that the teachers and the principal would be talking to the school board. The school board has a set of rules that allows them to determine whether or not a kiddo can come back to school, and that they would be following kind of this guideline to make some decisions, that while no one can predict the future, we will trust and believe that the folks that are in leadership at his school are going to do the best that they can to keep kids safe, just like they do every day. So referencing other times when the adults keep kids safe, like going on field trips and, when they have special events or things in the park, like our school will sometimes have a fun run or just other things where the adults are keeping kids safe, to kind of reassure him that grownups are working to keep you safe. And then talking about what consequences this kiddo gets, because the kiddo did come back to school on Monday morning. And so then talking to him about these are the things that the grownups are doing in your building to ensure that this kiddo is going to be able to be safe with you and the other kids in your building. One of those things, for example, is that this child has his person and his backpack checked each morning before he goes to class. And my kid can see each morning that this kid is going into the office. So he really is kind of getting that reassurance that the grownups are doing the things that they said they were going to do. So I think really anchoring to the facts and then being able to help your kids see the ways in which the grownups are working through ensuring their safety and the other children's safety in the building as well can be very helpful, or at least it was for my son.
So speaking of things that can be very helpful, Andrea, do you want to move us into our next section?
Yeah, so there are lots of strategies that we can use to support children during uncertainty. The first thing that we want to do is make sure that we're thinking about and taking care of ourselves. This seems like a really commonly known thing, but we talk a lot about putting on your oxygen mask first, right? Taking care of yourself, in reference to some of the things that we talked about earlier today, is going to be the first step in really ensuring that you are in the best possible space to be able to hold space for the children that you're caring for. So there are some really common things that we can do to take care of ourselves, like taking in enough food, getting enough sleep, drinking plenty of water, seeing how we can support others, either other adults in our community or other caretakers of our children in our community and within our families. We also want to make sure that we're reaching out for support for ourselves, right? I have several colleagues that I am working with who also are parents who have been working in the schools and SLPS who have reached out and said, hey, I just need to decompress about my day, right? To the point that Amy made earlier, kind of having those conversations in your car, making sure that little ears are not listening, but really taking that time to explore whatever feelings that you're having about what's going on with safe adults and friends in your community, and having it be an opportunity for both of you to decompress and explore your feelings that you're having about the shooting. Also, we can make some really big decisions that sometimes can have lasting consequences when we are in an emotional state. So thinking through, are there ways that decisions that we feel like need to be made immediately can be put off for some time as we really gather more information. So for example, last week on Wednesday, so the Wednesday after the CVPA shooting, I got new information about the child at my child's school who threatened to bring a gun, and I was up in arms. I canceled my class that I teach. I was like, I don't care what's happening. I'm going to that school and I'm getting my kid out of school right now. Right? That was in some ways, it was a rash decision because it was very emotionally charged, but I also felt like I needed to, in that instant, I needed to put eyes on my kid. I needed to know that he was okay. And I saw a lot of that happening on social media where I have friends that were like, oh, you know, this school said something's going on. I'm going to the school to get my kid. And I'm not saying that that wasn't the right choice for me, but making really big decisions like I'm going to pull my kid out of school and I'm going to homeschool them. That is going to be a big decision that's going to have some lasting consequences. So taking a beat, slowing down just a little bit and trying to avoid making large life-altering decisions during a time when we're feeling emotionally impacted, making sure that cooler heads have an opportunity to prevail can be really helpful. Also, give yourself some grace, take a break, take time to relax and do things that you really enjoy, whether that's spending time with family or some other type of coping skill that you use, really leaning into things that allow you to feel restored so that you can go back out and, as we say, fight the good fight, and really hold space for children. Those are all going to be things that we're going to want to do to take care of ourselves. Other things to remember is that kids tend to bounce back from life stressors. You know, we hear people say the phrase, children are resilient. And that's true, but children learn to be resilient. They don't just come out resilient. They learn to be resilient based on the interactions that they have with folks in their community, which really is why typically about 70% of children bounce back from stressful experiences based on the interactions that they have with the adults in their community and the resources in their community. That's also why it's so important for us to be in a good space. When we are in a good space and we are able to be the best versions of ourselves that we can be, we are modeling healthy coping skills, like all the things that I just talked about around eating, exercise, using appropriate affective language to describe our feelings and being able to say, you know, I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, or my tummy hurts when I talk about this too. So it makes sense that you're feeling that way. So we are really modeling what it means to express ourselves in an effective way. In addition to the 70% that tend to bounce back, there is another 20% of children that will need likely some brief supportive interventions to kind of help them process what they're thinking, feeling, and how they're behaving in response to the stressful experience, in this case, the school shooting. Only about 10% of the children after that, so I think either Amy or Megan talked about this earlier today, there typically is a 4 to 6 week window where we know that folks are going to have some reaction to stressors, right? We know that kids are going to still be thinking about the shooting. Kids are still going to have big feelings about the shooting. Adults are still going to be thinking about and having big feelings about the shooting. But after about that 4 to 6 week window, we begin to see some of those concerns and thoughts and stressors about the shooting, they'll begin to taper off. Only about 10% of kiddos remaining will continue to have intense symptoms that are connected to post-traumatic stress symptoms. That population is the one that we want to ensure that we are getting additional support for. And our goal is to work with that population in order to help strengthen some of those natural resources that they already have so that they are able to bounce back from that stressor in an effective way. So how do we help children cope? Well, we start by increasing their resilience and coping by connecting them with helpful grown-ups that really can help children to learn how to maximize and use their relaxation skills effectively. Many of us in this room are helpers, and so we have some skills around how to help children learn how to do things like take belly breaths and focus on mindfulness, whether that starts with mindful eating or just paying attention to their body, doing a body scan, right? There are lots of different relaxation strategies that we have taught children. What I think is really interesting, and it gives me a lot of solace around how to respond to children when a stressful event happens is that these are really just good everyday skills. And if we practice them outside of stressful situations, our children really will understand how to use them when a stressor happens in their lives, right? And so talking about relaxation is something that we really can be doing all of the time, not just when a stressful situation happens, so that when a stressor occurs, we can remind them, oh, you know what? My tummy is hurting too. Let's take a moment. Let's put our hands on our tummy. Let's take a deep belly breath so we can slow our bodies down so that when we talk about this, we're feeling a little bit more settled, right? We can also help them to develop their coping skills, recognizing that there are ways in which we might be thinking about this concern in a way that's both accurate, it is scary, and thinking about it as being scary and school is not a safe place and I can't go back to school doesn't really make us feel very good. So how do we couple that honest, true, valid thought with a thought that makes us feel better, right? So I'm not sure when I can go back to school, but it's okay. I can learn at home, right? My teachers are going to help me continue to learn. Also, we want to make sure that they're staying connected to their social contacts. So one of the things, this isn't necessarily about the CVPA shooting, but during COVID, my son is an only child for all intents and purposes. Like he lives in my house with me, right? And so he didn't really have a lot of interactions with other children. I'm very grateful that we agreed to get him a video game system the Christmas before, because, oh my gosh, the ways in which he interacted with his friends on the video game was huge. And I was so grateful because I don't know how I would have been able to keep him in contact with his friends. So thinking about how can you facilitate relationships that kids can continue to foster, even if they are doing homeschool. I think many of us had opportunities to learn how to do that during COVID, but that's something that we can think through even in response to this shooting. We also want to make sure that we're creating lots of structure and routine at home. One of the things that I have found in doing this work is that oftentimes grown-ups will respond to children by making structure more loose and less rigid, more flexible. And there are times when that's appropriate, but kids really need to have consistency in order to really help them bounce back. They need to know that what the grown-up says is what they mean and that they can trust that, because in situations where life stressors happen, oftentimes they are facilitated by situations that are outside of the child's control, right? And so we want to create structure so that kids understand that things are predictable in order to offset the situation where things just felt out of control and unpredictable and they didn't know what to do. The more that we can create that structure and routine in a loving and caring way, the more likely children are to be able to bounce back effectively. So thinking about that, the next thing we're going to talk about is how do we keep kiddos safe and create opportunities that feel comfortable for them. So at CAC, we like to say low and slow, right? So we want to get low, so down to a kiddo's eye level, so it's not this tall grown-up talking down to an adult. We want to slow down our speech. We want to slow down the ways in which we're using language. So really kind of bringing the language down to the child's level, ensuring that we're using words and content and context that they understand. We want to make sure that we're empathizing, kind of to the point that Amy made earlier, really looking at how do we validate the feelings that this child is having. What you are feeling is real and valid, even if we can show, well, the school has looked into this, you know, like the example for my son, the school has looked into this. They have indicated that this child is not a threat. These are the things that they're doing to ensure your safety and this kiddo's safety. My kid still felt scared, right? And that's very, very valid. And so really leaning into and validating, yes, it makes sense that you're still feeling scared. And it may be a while before you are able to go back to school and not feel scared. These are the things that we can do to help you manage some of those big, scary feelings, right? And then kind of proceeding with all of the things that we can do to increase safety and comfort for him. We want to make sure that we are reassuring the kiddos about the realistic things that they can do. So really, again, kind of latching onto the facts and the things that are being done that are realistic. We find, especially in younger children, that they will have some really kind of fantasticized thinking around, well, if the shooter comes in my room, I can do this, I can do that, right? Really helping them to understand what is a realistic expectation that they could do. We want to be honest about exactly what it is you can do. How do you plan to support them? For me and my family, one of the things that we talked about was not just kind of the plan for the intruder drill, but then also what happens afterward. After you've run out into the cemetery and you're hiding behind a tombstone, what is mom or dad going to do? How will I then support you? How will the grown-up support you? So him understanding that after he goes to wherever he's supposed to go, then a grown-up will come and collect them and take them to another school. And then I'm going to come, or dad's going to come and pick them up, right? So what is it that you can do as the grown-up to help them specifically? And then also asking directly, what do they need to feel safer, right? So having that conversation with my son in, okay, how can we ensure that you're feeling safe? And then helping them to follow through with whatever that thing may be. And really just taking your cues from the kiddo, helping them to take the lead so that their safety really is key. So when we start talking about stressful things, it's important to remember that talking about it doesn't increase the worry. In many cases, I think we all can relate to having stressful things that we feel like are just kind of weighing on us and running through our minds over and over again, and feeling like we just need to get those things out of our head, out of our heart, out of our mouths. And sometimes once we've said them, we feel a little lighter. It didn't make us think about it any more than we already were thinking about it. It just created an opportunity to get some of it off. We like to say off of our chest, right? And so creating those opportunities for kids is really important. Again, taking their lead and being sure not to be too pushy, listening to the cues that kids are giving you, both listening with your eyes and with your ears, right? If you start having a conversation with the kiddo and it seems as if they are maybe moving away or changing toys, or really just picking up on those social cues and indicators that maybe this kiddo is uncomfortable talking about this anymore, or they're ready to shift gears and talk about something different, taking your cues from the kiddo is going to be really important. Also, and this is something that grown-ups sometimes struggle with, listening more than you talk, right? Creating the space for the kiddos to share what they feel like needs to be shared, as opposed to you consistently sharing what you think needs to be shared. I think that sometimes as grown-ups, we tell kids more than they need to know because we're talking too much, right? If we listen to what they're actually asking us, things like Amy mentioned earlier, a baby comes from the mom, right? There was a shooting at this school, right? There may not be more details that the kid needs to know at that time. So really listening so that you can take the kid's lead is very important. The other thing is expect the unexpected. Kids get information from all kinds of resources that we don't even know about, right? They hear from their friends, they've seen things on YouTube and TikTok, and the list goes on and on. So we don't really know what information they're getting. And that really speaks to the point that Amy made earlier about being aware of where kids are getting their information from and trying to limit their access to things like social media and news broadcasts, especially around these types of topics, can be really important. We want to make sure that we are providing some stability for kiddos, because that really is key in helping children have opportunities to be able to explore their trauma in a safe and really comforting way. We want to make sure that we're, again, reminded that talking about it does not cause harm. Just ensuring that we are talking about how what they're thinking, how they're feeling, and how they're behaving are the things that we want to really make sure we're talking about. It can be less helpful to have kiddos talk to us about all the things that they think they know about the stressor, right? We don't want kids retelling the story of what happened. We really want to focus on, what are you feeling about that thing that happened? And what are you thinking? And what is that causing you? How is that causing you to behave? So other things that we want to think about when we're talking about it is really recognize your own reactions. And it's okay to lean into your reactions and to say, when we just started talking about that, that made my heart start beating fast. I think I need to slow down and take some deep breaths, right? Talking about this makes me feel this way. How does it make you feel, right? So being aware of your own reactions and modeling that it's okay to use affective language to talk about how things are making you feel, I think is really important. But you want to be able to temper your reactions so that your reactions are not so big that then they're kind of taking over the space. A lot of being able to do that comes from taking those opportunities to reach out to your own network, your own community, potentially your own therapist, to share your big feelings prior to having these talks with your kiddos. Don't make judgments or assumptions about how children are going to react or how they do react. Allow the space to be open for them to feel and think whatever it is that they feel and think, and find the pieces within what they're saying and sharing that are valid and validate them. Also, be honest. Give simple and brief answers that help children understand exactly what they need to know and exactly what they've asked without sharing more than what they need to know at any given time, and thinking about layering that information, as Amy mentioned earlier. Make sure your answers are simple, and they really are given in a way that reflects a tone that is calm and compassionate and understanding or empathetic of how it is they're feeling. And then you also want to recognize that it's okay to collectively talk about how you're experiencing this, right? That it didn't just happen, or it isn't just impacting the kids, that it is impacting both the kiddos and us. So there are lots of ways in which we can, engaging in these behaviors helps to facilitate stabilization. Stabilization really comes from developing and maintaining consistent routines, ensuring that kids continue to get to go to school in a way that is safe and healthy for them to do so, and then increasing contact with supportive adults. And so when we think about what that looks like, daily routines really are all about ensuring that kiddos know what to expect across the course of their day. So talking about, okay, I'm going to drop you off at school today, and then you have soccer practice after school, and dad's going to pick you up, or grandma's going to pick you up, and then we're going to have dinner. So really understanding a lot about what their day is going to look like. And to the best of your ability, not allowing children to avoid people, places, or things that cause some emotional activation. What we know is that avoiding things like school, for example, really can have a negative impact on kiddos in terms of their stress outcomes across time. And so we want to figure out, how can we make places like school feel safe? So when we're thinking about school support and school attendance, really, again, leaning into and helping kids to process whatever their big worries are, hearing them out. What is the thing that they're most concerned about? How can we help that concern to be less? Talking with teachers and other supportive folks in the building so that they understand what your kiddos' concerns are and can empathize with those concerns, but also create structure and stability for the kiddo within the classroom. And then helping them to figure out which grownups in the building feel safe for them to talk to, right? It might not be their teacher. It might be their school counselor. It might be the school social worker. It might be the lady who works at the front desk, right? So really helping them figure out who are the people in their building that they feel like they can connect to if they're feeling a little bit unsafe within the school day. Those are all really great suggestions for how we can help children to feel stabilized. And there are also ways in which, even after children are feeling stabilized and we've done all the things that we've talked about so far, there's more support that's needed. And so Amy's going to talk to us a little bit more about what that might look like moving forward.
All right. Thank you, Andrea. So we referenced earlier that there are just a lot of reactions that pop up in the first few weeks after a shooting and after a crisis. So with that in mind, we wanted to sort of offer some decision points about, like, when is it that we need to get kids in for individual or family-based mental health services? And our biggest recommendation would be to just trust your instinct, right? Like, if you know the children that you're working with, you know the children that you're interfacing with, and if your gut is like, something is off here in a way that doesn't seem to be resolving, feel free to go ahead and reach out. So some specific things that we have, and we just got this question, but we are going to clear out these slides. We will drop the slides into the chat as well as include them in our wrap-up email. So for our young kiddos, it's going to be looking for things like major changes in their behaviors. So are they reenacting some part of a school shooting? Are there questions? And is it something that is happening with a high enough frequency that it's interfering with other pieces of life. We referenced this earlier, but sort of ongoing difficulties with developmental regressions, so toileting, sleep problems. And again, young children, nightmares, tantrums, being afraid of things, that happens. But really what we want to be mindful of is the magnitude. So is it so many nightmares, a child isn't sleeping? Is it so many tantrums, grown-ups are late to work and you can't get where you need to be? For our children who are a little bit older, for our school age children, again, we're going to see kiddos that are having really, significant difficulties concentrating and paying attention. Is a child going more often to the calm down corner? Are they isolating themselves? And again, we're not necessarily looking here for like one time of a big tantrum. We're looking for really that pervasiveness and ongoing pieces. In addition, kiddos might start isolating themselves or have really for any age group, it's really these like characteristic responses. So emotional or behavioral reactions from kids that don't seem to match the context of what's going on. And again, not one time, but ongoing in a way where you're like, this is just not who this child is. In addition, and I know this question came through in the chat and we will move into that momentarily, but if it's a kid, especially who's not going to school, that is the time that we want to reach out to. Again, it's finding that balance of understanding that things have been very complex, but school refusal behaviors, these are things we want to jump on right away. So if there's ongoing sleep problems, and especially in these older age group, you might get children who say things like, well, if I had been there, I could have been able to stop this or prevent this from happening. So especially if you see kids like taking responsibility for things that are clearly not their responsibility, that they clearly had no capacity to do, that's when we want to be concerned. So to synthesize some of that information, for our for our teenagers, again, same sorts of things of isolation, increases in depression, anxiety. Some specific teenager unique things that you might be seeing are what we call our maladaptive coping behaviors. So if you have teenagers that have not used marijuana before or have not drank alcohol before, and all of a sudden they are staying out late a lot, breaking their curfew, using drugs, using alcohol, engaging in reckless behaviors, all of those sorts of things are signs that we need a little more support here. And in addition to sort of these difficulties, making healthy decisions, we also want to be thoughtful of the kids where it's just like, I should just give up. Like bad things are going to happen no matter what I do. Somebody's going to come, somebody might hurt me. So that sort of overgeneralizing from one situation to the whole world is unsafe, the whole world is dangerous, and therefore, why even bother? And one other sign to look for here too is when our teenagers are really pushing everybody away. And for those of you with teenagers in your house, you might be like, yeah, but my kid pushes me away all the time. So again, we're looking for changes in behavior. So are they pushing people away in some more spectacular way than they might typically do that? So in general, then, on our next slide, is when you have a kid who is engaging in behaviors and is displaying stress reactions, and it is interfering with their functioning. And what we mean is they're not going to school, you see a drop in grades. Again, we're early on for some of these things to be popping up, but just to kind of keep your eyes out moving forward. In addition, as soon as we hear things like, I want to hurt myself, engaging in self-harm behaviors, suicidality, 100% reach out right away. And you may also see things, again, like if a child's stress reactions are so intense, they can't sleep, they can't eat. All of those things can just compound. And those would also be times that we would want to reach out. And in addition, and Megan referenced this earlier, that we have seen that people really are longing for connection, longing for community and spaces to talk about the community level impact of this shooting and their experiences that day in the district. So especially when you have a child who says, I want to talk about what's going on, or they sort of seem stuck in this or have this hopelessness or helplessness. All of these are times where we want to say, like, hey, let's hop in here, let's get a little bit more support and move forward. And if you're like, that sounds great, but how do we do that? We are actually really well equipped as a community of highly trained, competent therapists in our organization and across the St. Louis region who are well trained in child trauma responses. And to that end, Megan is going to share some information about the resources that we have, and then we will finish up today with our question and answer period. And I just want to give a heads up, I will need to hop off prior to the question and answer period to attend to another commitment at 10 o'clock, but you will all be in very good hands with Megan and Andrea and Jerry.
Thank you, Amy. So as Amy mentioned, sometimes seeking out additional services and support for somebody that you care about is needed. And at our center, we are trauma informed and trauma trained clinicians, and we are able to provide therapeutic intervention. We are also in some schools providing support and intervention as well. So you can always check with your child's school to see if we are a partner that's there, or if there is another partner in the St. Louis region that is also in the school providing therapeutic support. But as an agency, we offer both short-term and long-term therapeutic intervention. And we currently have a special number dedicated for children who are experiencing symptoms related to the shooting. So if that is a child that you are caring about, you can call the 314-516-4284 number, and that will connect you directly with Susie, who is our intake specialist serving the short-term intervention crisis response. That is about 6 or so sessions where we are having caregivers and their child participate in the intervention. For long-term services, we do ask that you call 314-516-7330. And for services for adults, Community Psychological Services on UMSL's campus is another great resource for you. For long-term intervention, our wait list right now is about 4 months or so. For short-term CVPA, which again is the 516-4284 number, it's really hard to say what our wait list is looking like as referrals are coming in each day. It also depends on what is your child's availability. After school appointment times and evening appointment times are, of course, in high demand. So if there is someone that's available during the school day, availability looks much different. We do provide services at our 3 locations. We have a location in the Central West End on West Pine. We have a location in Kirkwood, right in downtown Kirkwood. And then our 3rd location is on UMSL's campus. And so we really do encourage folks to reach out if you've got a child that you're caring for who is showing some signs that maybe talking with somebody would be a good idea for them. We really do encourage you to reach out and get them connected. We are just one of the providers in the agency. There are many others who can also provide great therapeutic support and intervention. And so we encourage folks to also reach out if you feel like that's a better fit. We really have asked our clinicians, as Jerry put in the chat, to ask our clinicians to create every opening on their calendar possible in order for us to be able to provide service to children in a short-term intervention through CVPA. So it is a priority of our agency to provide services and to respond to our community as we are learning how to heal and how to really respond as a community. So please reach out. feel free to reach out. And you could always even call and say, hey, is this the best place? Let's talk through it. And if it doesn't seem like it is for whatever reason, then we could refer you elsewhere. We also do provide virtual services as well, if virtual services is a better fit. So lots of different options. So please take advantage of what's in the community to help support you, the adults, but also to help support the children.
And another point to make about CFTSI is that it is a brief intervention. It's typically, we can get children and families really stabilized within 5 to 7 sessions. Some of those sessions can occur 2 sessions in a week. So what we're anticipating is that we will be able, we've asked our clinicians to open up their calendars as much as possible. And so we are hoping that we'll be able to cycle through referrals and get children and families' needs addressed relatively quickly. And so hopefully the wait list will not stay, we'll be able to meet your needs fairly quickly.
Here's just some additional links to additional resources and handouts, and also just wanting to make sure that folks are aware that our services are free, which is also another great thing. So we receive funding for St. Louis County through the Children's Service Fund and through St. Louis City through the St. Louis City Mental Health Board. So if cost is a concern, please understand that that's not a barrier at our agency. And again, just additional links for resources that are would be great for you to make sure that you're aware of.
Here are just some online resources. So we are partners with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, and they have curated quite a collection of resources for helping children and families following a school shooting. So there's a link for that. And then within those, there's different fact sheets that really break things down essentially by age, that really go into a little bit more depth around what Andrea and Amy and Megan were able to go into today. So lots of opportunities to build our resource chest and our toolkits, if you will, from online resources. And these will be, we can always send these to you all if you need these in another form.
While we're still talking about services, there's a question in the chat. Our services are free to everyone. So it's not just if you are somebody looking for services related to the shooting. If you know a child or care about a child who's experienced another form of trauma, our agency is able to provide services for them as well at no cost. Mm-hmm. In addition to clinical services, our agency also provides forensic services. If you are an adult in the line, typically a first responder, please just keep in mind that our forensic team is still available for you for any needs. But I think that the majority of folks on today's session really would be focused on our clinical referrals and really understanding that we are here to provide services to our community, and we'll continue over the weeks to come to assess the needs of SLPS specifically, but also begin to respond as other districts are seeing that staff in their buildings and potentially students as well are also impacted.
So Megan, are we going to talk at all about the group intervention RCI?
Yeah, we absolutely can.
I can say a little bit about that too.
Perfect.
So one of the things that we also have available that in previous crisis situations that we have found to be very helpful to community members is a group a group format called RCI, or Resiliency and Coping Intervention. And that is a small group setting, typically 6 to 8 to 10 people that have shared a common experience that has been traumatic or upsetting or stressful to them. And they come together with a facilitator, and it's typically a one-time group. Sometimes it can extend to 2, but often it can be done in 1, where those folks get a chance to really share what was the event that happened that they have in common, move forward and talk a little bit about what some of the feelings and thoughts that have the event has generated for them, and then begin to think through what are some coping strategies, what are some things that we could do. It's a very forward thinking movement model that allows folks as a group to determine what are some options for some actions, both in the individual within the group, but also for the group to think through. And so that is a group that can be facilitated. We certainly have facilitators. So if there's a small group that you can identify that you would like to, maybe it's for school teachers, or maybe it's for just whatever group. It can be done with children, young children, adolescents, or adults. We do have those facilitators available, and certainly willing to take requests and see what we can get scheduled for any groups that you'd like for us to do. The other alternative, which I think is really elegant with RCI, is that it does not have to be facilitated by someone. It can be facilitated by any caring adult. It does not have to be someone who is with a mental health background necessarily. So to that end, we are working now to put together a training session around RCI. So please just watch your email, and we're going to try to offer that to the community for you all, or anyone else that you think might be appropriate to learn to become a facilitator of RCI. And then that's just going to really increase our bench strength. So that is just one other offering that I think would be relevant, and another intervention that would be relevant to this particular circumstance. Okay.
Thank you, Jerry. So yeah, we'd like to turn it over to you all now. And I know that there was the question in the chat. So how would you respond to a kiddo that's saying that they just don't want to go to school? Andrea, do you have some suggestions to lead off with?
Yeah, I think really leaning into my own experience with my son is the things that I talked about earlier, right? Just kind of validating what's valid, that it makes sense, that they're feeling nervous or scared, but then also talking about the things that you have put in place, the school has put in place, that can help them to feel more secure, and then helping them to see the ways that the school is doing those things. Another thing that I think can be really helpful for us as the grownups is to have the information in terms of understanding what the school is doing to help kids feel more secure. I know even for myself, that was something that I had to look into, like, well, what exactly does happen in these instances? How long does the school board have to convene and make decisions around these things? What are the possible consequences? So I think thinking about that, also in terms of, like, for kiddos that are concerned based on this current incident of the shooting, really thinking through, like Amy mentioned earlier, helping them to understand that the person who did this is not going to be able to do this again, and that schools are aware that there are other threats, and the ways in which schools are connecting with police and law enforcement to ensure that their buildings are safe, and reminding them again that there have been lots of times when teachers and other folks in the building have worked to keep them safe in the past. But I think the main things are validating how they're feeling, leaning into that what they're feeling makes sense, that we all are feeling a little bit scared, and that there are things that are happening and ways in which the grownups are working to do everything that they can to keep kids safe, but also being sure not to promise, right? Not to promise that they will be safe, not to promise that this won't happen in their school, because we just can't keep that promise.
Yeah, and beyond that, considering connecting your child to services, if those, the validation, the reassurances, the securing information and having knowledge about what the school is doing to help keep kids safe, if that is not helping reassure them, then maybe it is time to talk with someone else. You heard Amy talk about how, avoidance of places such as school isn't really healthy. And so being able to give children the tools that they need that they feel like, yeah, I can do this. I can go back to school. I can continue to do things that I once did before, that I enjoyed before, and I can feel safe doing them again. Ultimately, that's what we want, is for the children to feel safe as they move about and navigate life. So being able to give them those tools is really important. There was also a question in the chat earlier about, is there a policy that schools have to inform caregivers when a weapon is brought to school? And the answer is no, there is not a policy that parents or caregivers must be notified. And I would say that it's probably going to be dependent on the situation as to whether or not a school or a district would choose to make that publicly known. I have, like I said, in my experience with SLPS, there was times that we did respond as a crisis team because a weapon was brought to school and children were aware of that and staff were aware of it. And it was necessary for them to process their feelings around that. How did it make them feel? Sometimes they were processing the response of the school or the response of the district. Sometimes the response was more stressful to them than the actual event. So no, in short, there is no policy. What other questions do folks have? We want to open it up to you. You can feel free to drop it in the chat, or you're more than welcome to unmute and ask your question if you feel comfortable. All right. I'll read the silence, and I understand. We want to thank you all. We want to thank you for being here today and taking the time out to educate yourselves and to really understand of what help is out there and how you can be a part of the healing yourselves. If you are caring for a child that is struggling, if you are struggling, again, there are resources and there are supports in the community. Folks are wanting to help our community heal. So take advantage of the resources that are out there. And will the recording be shared? Tenley, yes. Tenley is saying yes, the recording will be shared with you.
And so for those who couldn't be here today, we just want to get this information out as broadly as we possibly can.
Yes, so please feel free to share it widely. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for caring for our community in the way that you are.
All right.